Hi, this is Keith Cutter with EMFRemedy.com. I have a special treat for you today. We're going to be listening to an interview that I conducted with Julia Lupine. She has just written a book, basically a survival guide for electromagnetic poisoning or dealing with electrical sensitivity. This is an incredible story, so I encourage you to listen to the interview. We're going to talk about somebody who, frankly, did whatever it took to survive. The book is called Living Under a Rock, and she literally lived in the desert in caves to survive the onslaught of Wi-Fi and cell phones and whatnot. It is an amazing story. Coming up. All right, my guest today is Julia Lupine. She's a many-year survivor of electromagnetic poisoning, and she wants to share her story. Welcome, Julia.
Hi.
Well, I'm so glad we could get together. It's been a bit of a challenge. Nothing is easy when non-native electromagnetic fields influence your life in a great way. So we've probably been working on setting this up for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks now. Do you think?
Probably something like that. Just getting the internet access and then figuring out how to, because I'm using a friend's computer, and then figuring out how to use Zoom and getting the lighting right and getting the
Yeah.
sound to work and getting the goat to shut up so we can start.
Right.
You know.
Well,
But finally, I think this is gonna work now.
we're going to have to get into and tell people why there's a goat there, but telling this story, this is going to be a bit of a challenge, and we're not going to be able to get it all in today. But can you share with people a bit of your story?
My story is I had a fairly normal childhood, suburban Connecticut, and never really felt quite at home there. So I went west as soon as I could. But anyway, and I traveled around and lived in different states. But when I was 28 years old, I moved to the Moab, Utah area, and I was just doing. I wasn't. I was already living off grid when I became electrosensitive. I was interested in primitive skills and survival and trying to live off the land and cook over fires and gather wild plants, did a little bit of hunting. And I was, just trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my life and having a great time, really, just living like this. But I noticed that whenever I went back so I was traveling, kind of living out of a backpack and spending time in different caves and remote areas and working a day or two here landscaping or painting when I needed money and partying with friends on weekends in Moab. And what I started noticing was when I'd come into town, I felt weird and really scattered and overwhelmed. And at first, I thought it was just overstimulus. But I noticed I started getting headaches, and when I would hold my phone up to my ear, I'd start getting a burning pain right here, and it just got worse and worse the longer I used the phone. So I started holding it out further, and that worked for a while, and then that started hurting. And I eventually got angry enough at it that I smashed it with a rock, but which I recommend everyone do. It feels great. But that was not the end of my problems, because I just started getting worse and worse. And being near a Wi-Fi router or going under power lines or any kind of electromagnetic exposure would bother me, but I didn't know anything about it. My friends thought I was crazy, and I just thought I somehow equated it to the psychic woo woo and energy and all of this. Just didn't really vibes. I didn't really understand the electromagnetic spectrum and the science behind it. I just knew something was seriously wrong. And um, after a couple of years of this, it got worse, possibly triggered by me climbing a cell phone tower to try to face my fears, which I don't recommend anyone do. Didn't work out too well. And I had a splitting headache and nausea afterward and didn't feel well for about a week. And my sensitivities just got worse and worse to the point where I was living in caves most of the time. And my family, or my friends mostly did think I was crazy, or at least I just perceived it that way. And I tried to be tough and say, well, I don't need people. I'm just going to stay out here. But um, after a while of that, I started getting a little better. The longer I was, because one thing with electrosensitivity is the longer you stay away from it, the better you feel. And eventually, if you heal enough, your resistance gets better. And I was actually still in fairly good health. I would get these symptoms, but when I wasn't around something electrical, I felt great. I was hiking maybe on average 5 miles a day with a backpack and hauling spring water and hitchhiking and going in between these different campsites and trying to live as natural of a lifestyle as I could. And one day in 2016 on a whim, I decided to hitchhike to the East Coast to visit my family in Vermont, who live in a house there was no Wi-Fi, and it was in a one stoplight town with a 3G tower that wasn't that close. So I figured I'd probably be fine. And things went pretty well for a while. And it was, did a lot of hiking, and it was great to reconnect with my family. But one day I was in the hospital getting some routine blood work done because I had a problem turned out to be my gallbladder, but I didn't know it at the time. It was congested and full of gallstones, and I was having major digestive troubles and losing a bunch of weight. So I was in the hospital room, in the waiting room, waiting to get my blood drawn. And it was pretty much wireless hell in there. And I just got a headache that got worse and worse and worse and normally I would have left at that point, but I wanted to get this blood work done. So I stuck it out until my vision started getting like whiting out, like getting weird. I was visibly shaking. The nurses finally they got me in, and they said they'd have to strap me down in order to get me to stop shaking to draw my blood, and never have an emergency in the emergency room. Just don't care. They don't. So ended up never getting the test. When I realized my vision was going, I just ran out of there. Almost ran into some tape on a construction site outside the hospital, but I went and laid down in the grass and it was like a seizure, but not uncontrollable. But I was like pretty much shaking and smacking the ground and screaming. And after a while of that, I felt better, calm, and my dad drove me home. Felt great, felt fine for the rest of the day. Went to sleep. I woke up in electromagnetic hell. The world had changed, or I had changed. It was a thresholding event that brought me to the next level of electrosensitivity. It's like steps. There's definite change. There's definite before and after, usually triggered by a large exposure. Other people's experiences are consistent with this. And from that moment on, I was walking across my yard and I would stop. I'd feel like an invisible fence, and it was the neighbor's Wi-Fi. And I went around my whole yard, and there was one house that didn't have it, but I didn't feel that. Later turned out they didn't have Wi-Fi. I didn't really know that at the time. And I couldn't even go in the house. There was no Wi-Fi in my family's house, but I couldn't even go in. I had these varicose veins that appeared, and I was 35 years old. But I had these varicose veins that appeared on my arms and legs that day, and they would flare up around electrical fields. I get the shakiness. My headaches became migraines, and just opening the refrigerator would trigger this. And so I was sleeping outside in the garden shed anyway, and it was okay right there, but anywhere else around, because I picked the lowest signal spot in the yard. But pretty much going anywhere or interacting with society in any way after that became almost impossible. Or using the refrigerator, I just kept my food in a cooler sitting in the stream, which I'd done before and was used to living primitively, cooking over a fire grate in the yard. Like all of that was fine, but it was getting harder and harder to uh, live this way. So luckily I moved to, I'll try to speed the story up a little bit here, but my family also owned an abandoned house halfway up a ski mountain. This house had been abandoned. It was a really nice house that would have been an expensive ski house, but it had been abandoned 30 years ago. So there was no power, but it was this uh, small mansion with marble countertops and stuff. And I was like cooking over it. So I moved up there, and serendipitously, it happened to be the one spot on the mountain where you pretty much couldn't make a cell phone call. It was like in this little valley that was protected. And I had like acres of space, and my cat and I would just go hiking every day. And I lived up there for 6 months. It was like being on a wildlife refuge. It was probably the most alone I've ever been. Um, and but it was mostly a great time, although I was sick. If I accidentally wandered off the refuge and got into the line of sight of a cell tower, or got too near the Wi-Fi of the nearest ski lodge, I'd immediately lose all my energy and just have to drag myself home. But mostly had a good time up there. But then when the first snows came, I had to move back down the mountain to the family's main house and spend a long winter in a house with power. I turned off the power to my bedroom, and just spent my time in the areas of the house and I didn't even have a meter at the time, which would have been helpful if I did, but I could just tell where the lowest amounts of AC electric power were. And it became a strategic chess game. Don't touch the hot lava. And survived that way until the spring. But health was getting progressively worse, and I knew I just had to get back to Moab, and to an area where I could live out in the desert away from any signals. So got on the Amtrak, made it back there, barely, but didn't look too good when I got off. But I went back to cave life and told myself I would never leave again. And long story short, that was going well for a while. Then I had a health crisis with my gallbladder and had to go to the hospital and get what's it called, an endoscopy. And that was when I figured out what it was, and just started taking steps herbally to fix it. They wanted me to take it out, but I had a horrible candida infection, a systemic infection of the body too, which is a very common thing with electrosensitives. But anyway, started taking steps to fix that. But around that time, I met a lady who had a farm with goats in a remote area, and she also was electrosensitive. And I moved in with her and started doing chores around the farm. She taught me everything about goats and gardening, and I was just able to really have a meaningful life. And that led toward me getting my own farm very close by. And anyway, I'm still here and get to play with goats and kitties all day and have a wonderful life and hike all the time and have the best views and have a group of friends out here and in an area with no Wi-Fi. My health has come back. I feel awesome and life is good. And now I wrote this book, and Under a Rock, an electrosensitive survival guide. And right now I'm trying to promote it and get the word out, and mostly try to inspire other people and let them know, things can be better. But you've got to take the steps, get away from the problem, and don't stand for it anymore and make yourself a life in a safer area.
Yeah, that's great. And I have a copy of the book as well, and I've enjoyed reading it. And I recommend that people who are interested in this topic um, do check it out, and we'll give you some information about it at the end there. But that's a brief outline of the story that you'll read about in the book. There's quite a bit more detail on that particular part of the story, and some things that Julia has found that's made it a bit easier. But you just mentioned that the critical thing is getting away from it. So talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. I mean, there's a lot of herbs and different things you can do, to dietary things you can do, but after a point, what you don't want to do is just make yourself healthy and stay in the fields long enough to have a thresholding reaction and make yourself worse. That's what I did, because I just got so good at um, using anti-inflammatory herbs and different things to manage the symptoms that I stayed longer than I should have. Um, and what you really need to do is at least sleep in a safe place, or if you can't do that, get away on weekends, and um, just spend as much time as you can in field-free areas, and use a meter to find these areas, or just your intuition can help too, because often I don't even need the meter. I just know that an area is okay or not. And then later when I check with the meter, I was right almost every time. But get away from it and just don't stand for it anymore. It's not normal for people to live this way. We all
Yeah,
know it.
yeah, truly, truly. And what I really like about your story, it's been said that most people like you and I, electrosensitives, or I just call it electromagnetic poisoning,
Yeah,
because it seems to me like we've poisoned the earth. We're in the process of poisoning the earth, and then we're surprised when people react with symptoms of being
right.
poisoned. But maybe I'm too direct. But the thing I like about your story, it's been said that the people like us just go away and die quietly. And that's not the case with your story. In fact, what I really love about it is there wasn't anything that was too much to try to accomplish in order to get away from this type of poisoning. So you were literally living in caves. And if you might want to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but you were literally living in caves in a very remote area, just to get away from the last whisper of man-made electromagnetism, in order that you could begin to get healthy, begin to develop a bit of resistance against these symptoms. So talk about that dimension. I mean, what was too much to do for you to get out of the burn, as some people have called it?
Right. I mean, really, nothing's too much. If it's your health and your sanity and your life, you should do everything you can. And it's a challenge,
Would you
but
eat would you eat dog food?
I quit. I quit years ago. Haven't looked back. But yeah,
Yeah.
I tried all kinds of things, and some of my ideas were winners, and some a little less so. And I was, trying to up the protein intake, because I tried all different types of diets, and I thought maybe the low carb, high protein thing would be good. And I had this brilliant idea that they don't really make meat in because I didn't have a refrigeration in the caves, and meat would have gone bad. And so canned food made more sense, but they don't really make canned meat for humans. But organic dog food and cat food, they did gave it a try for a while, and my friends really thought I was crazy then. And then I got kind of addicted to it, and I put spaghetti sauce on it or try, and it was like, and then I got into the kibble stuff. And anyway, don't go there. It's not a winner. I
Well,
had to eventually stop.
you know what I really love about you sharing that and sharing it so openly and honestly in your book and right now is that you don't even mention the obvious thing. The really, really obvious thing is you couldn't work um, to be
Oh
able to
yeah,
afford a proper home
yeah,
away from
there was that.
well,
And
that's foundational, right?
yeah, you need to work to support yourself. And for a while, I wouldn't even go on food stamps because I was too proud. And I encourage everyone to get over that, get whatever kind of help you can. It's your life at stake. And, in the situation that we're facing is not fair. So at least stack the odds in your favor. But beyond that, get some survival, start a garden, and learn about wild edibles and get some goats if you can, or chickens, whatever, and just try to be self-supporting as much as you can. And that'll empower you and give you, I eat great now, and goat milk lattes in the morning, and cheese and yogurt and produce from the garden, fruit off the trees.
Yeah,
And
it's absolutely an amazing point in your story where you've gone through this incredible adversity and nothing has been too much to do, too much to endure, too much to try in order to get away from the poisoning. And so you're altering your lifestyle, the food you would eat, where you're staying. You haven't mentioned in this interview, but you're packing in some cases your own water for miles in order to get it to a safe place to sleep. So I just love that spirit of being willing to do what's necessary to get out of the radiation exposure so that you can begin to improve. And then now, of course, and we haven't talked too much about it, but you've been able to buy land and are starting to get your own farm together, which is fantastic. But before we get there, you mentioned something about these threshold events. So you had the idea with a little coaxing from one of your friends to climb a cell phone tower, and yeah, and the idea, I got to say, you were trying to face your fear over, although maybe I'll say you didn't really understand the the nature of this beast entirely. But anyway, you climbed this cell phone tower, or if it wasn't a cell phone tower, it was a microwave dish of some sort. Anyway, microwave communications of some sort.
with a big round antenna.
Yeah. Did you have a name for that tower?
Yeah, we called it the Satan tree.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
Even my friends and my dad started calling it that.
Right.
Because
So
you got to call it how it is.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it seems like that was an inflection point, and then the other that you mentioned was when you were at the hospital and you needed to get this blood draw, and the environment in the hospital, the electromagnetic environment in the hospital, was so offensive that, as I'm reading it, you're in this sympathetic nervous system state, and you're forcing yourself to be there just as long as you could. But after that much radiation exposure for that long, while you're waiting and waiting and waiting for your turn to come, that finally you weren't in the shape to be able to do a blood draw. And
Yeah, yeah,
everything afterwards was different for you. That was like you say, a threshold event. So then you mentioned that you were sensitive not only to radio frequency radiation, microwave radiation, what would come from a cell phone tower, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, any of that nonsense, but that you were actually sensitive to the electricity in the home, right?
yeah, yeah. And it's just it's a lower frequency than Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi tends to be what people get sensitized to first, but it's really all non-native radiation. There's nothing in our natural environment that would be in this particular waveform. So even though we think a refrigerator is normal or a electric light, and most people don't have a problem with these things, but I think it's when our nervous system gets damaged by these higher frequencies that our immunity just lowers to other frequencies. And there's electrosensitives who can tolerate household AC power, but not a cell phone. We're not all allergic to the same things, but the longer your exposure goes on, it tends to get worse. And then if you get away from it, it can be somewhat reversible to a point if you get away from it soon enough. But what I've seen is in extreme cases like myself, it's just best to avoid it completely as much as we can.
Right. Yeah, I resonate with that comment. So let's talk a little bit about when maybe this really began. So another thing that you share very honestly and very openly in the book is your experience in grade school. Can you talk about that a little bit, and then also contrast that with suddenly you're able to write a book, get a farm, be productive in life, move out of a cave?
Before and after.
Yeah. So can you talk about that a little bit?
For sure. Well, when I was a kid, I was a straight A student and in fairly good health, but it was around around high school, which was like the late 90s, early 2000s. And coincidentally, that was about the time the cell towers were really becoming prevalent, especially on the East Coast where I was, but I would have never made that connection. But around age 15, 16, I noticed my concentration started getting really bad in school, and I went from straight A's to like C's and D's, and I just wouldn't care. When I got my driver's license, which took a while because I was pretty bad at driving and would get really confused in traffic. But anyway, I would be driving to school in the morning and just I just couldn't make that right turn. I'd end up going straight and going to the beach, just because I didn't care anymore. And my concentration was just horrible. And I just thought, in my first job experiences too, sometimes I would be really good at things, but then other times my concentration was so bad that I could, I had dreams of becoming a wildlife biologist, but by the time I was in my early to mid 20s, I could handle walking dogs or holding a hose and watering plants, just really doing simple menial tasks. So, and flunking out of college, just not being able, mostly just having, and I just thought I was stupid, because I would have never made the connection between the cell phone in my pocket and the symptoms I was experiencing. And I wasn't much of a technology addicted person at the time. I just thought I used the cell phone for communication. It wasn't even a smartphone back then. But they have strong Wi-Fi at colleges, and there's cell phone towers everywhere. So I just I had trouble concentrating and really bad insomnia. And so I just realized that this career maybe wasn't going to work out so well. So I mostly just got drunk a lot, and I had a great time doing it. I would work and then come home, go to the bar, and just had to drink a lot of caffeine to make myself feel good too, because I had chronic fatigue and would not feel well. So I'd drink these energy drinks and they'd make me really hyper, and I'd party for a few days and then crash. And so I thought I was bipolar, but it was probably just triggered by this environment and the steps I was taking to cope with it. But anyway, yeah, it was really till when I moved to the remote areas and started living in the caves, that my things started to change. I felt good and my health was coming back, but then it would get bad when I spent too much time in town. And that was when I started making the connection. And I maybe heard of electrosensitivity before, but never thought it would happen to me. And but I just cause and effect. I just realized when I do this, I get a headache. When I don't, I feel great. And so, I may have been electrosensitive all along. I was born during a thunderstorm early, so the drop in barometric pressure, you know. And I think we're all a little electrosensitive, especially it tends to happen more to women, but I know a lot of men who have it too. And it may be underdiagnosed in men actually because they tend to get more angry and women tend to get more depressed just as a general rule, and men don't like to admit that they have a problem, but and most people don't like to admit that they have this problem. But
Yeah.
I guess what I'd like to stress is that we don't have the problem. The rest of the world has the problem, and not normal to live this way. Our ancestors, we didn't go through however many years of evolution our species has gone to. We through, you know, and now a typical day is checking your Twitter account and asking Alexa to order you a pizza and sit in front of a Wi-Fi device all day at work. Don't we want something better for ourselves and our children and the future of humanity?
And so, and I really appreciate that. And Julia shares a lot of things in her books, just very blunt, very straight, very upfront. Here's what it is. And that's one of the things I really enjoyed about the book. So you just told me a story about how when you were younger, you were an A student. And then about the time cell phones and Wi-Fi started to proliferate, although you never made the connection, you very soon thought of yourself as stupid. Your
Yeah,
grades, your grades were slipping and whatnot. And I don't
and
know
that's
you
not fair.
say that.
I'm I'm mad.
Yeah, I call it righteous indignation. And I think there's a place for that. But I'm not going to spend time in my own case, I was mistreated and misdiagnosed for over 30 years.
Hmm.
I thought panic attacks were some defect in me. In my case, it was panic attacks. In yours, it was this intellectual um, blockage.
Yeah, disorientation, confusion.
Yeah, yeah, and the directional, so that you weren't able to drive, the way that
Yeah,
you should, and you just all of a sudden dropped all of your life expectations to say, well, maybe I can just water a plant with a hose, and that'll be it for me.
yeah,
But so you and I have had a chance to talk twice now, and I've gotten to know you just a little bit, and I've seen how you write, and you and I have chatted about some of the things that you've learned about recently. Do you think you're stupid now, or
um, I'd say not.
yeah, I would say not. And so, and then from there, I just go to how many other people are suffering with how many other parts of this type of poisoning that never make the correlation. So I don't know. I want to ask you something. I think we're the lucky ones,
Oh yeah,
and I
it
think we're
took
the
me a
lucky.
while to believe that, but
Yeah.
I do. I'm thankful for everything I've experienced.
So tell me about the various types of stimulation, the caffeine and the getting drunk. As you look over your life and maybe when that began, maybe when it peaked, you know, where it is now, etc. Do you think that might be at all related to this this poisoning?
Yeah. Well, I'd say that it's what people do to mask their symptoms. It allowed me, especially drinking, allowed me to exist in cities a lot longer than I probably should have stayed there. But which I don't regret any of it. I had some great experiences, even lived in Miami where I would probably never be able to set foot there now. Um, but I think definitely it's a band-aid, and people have a hard time giving up their drugs. And if they did, things might change in society. Probably have a lot more people waking up to this crisis that we're going through. And and I'll still drink massive amounts of coffee every time I have to go into town and get groceries. And it definitely helps get me through it. And then I have to cut back the drink yerba mate or green tea or something for the rest of the week, just so my tolerance doesn't get too high. And so that'll work again the next time. As far as alcohol goes, I've cut it out completely, and I recommend everyone else do the same too. It doesn't actually help. Pharmaceuticals, same thing. They mask the symptoms, but they'll make you sick over time. And there's really no cure for this because it's not a disease. It's just some people feel it more than others. We're, like you said, we're the lucky ones.
Yeah, we're the lucky ones, I think.
I think.
Although, in both of our cases, we had to make enormous changes in what we were willing to put up with.
Yeah.
Really.
I mean,
Yeah.
below freezing temperatures, sleeping outside in cars because you can't sleep in your family's house.
Right.
I like to pride myself on being tough, so I guess it's okay. And I was willing to do it rather than, go to the poor me victim act and complain, because what was anyone going to do about it anyway? They're not going to turn the power off to the entire house.
So
And
so let's make a big change, and I want to talk about right now,
yeah.
where things are, and about the goats, and the kind of abundant life that you're having, that you describe in the book, and how your parents really came through for you and whatnot. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I was able to get this farm in 2020. I saved up a little bit of money from, well, mostly from COVID unemployment. It was great. And then my parents did come through for me and help me with the rest. They're awesome people. Thank you, Mom and Dad. They get a free lifetime supply of goat cheese whenever they want. And they're just happy to see me doing well, because I think they realized, they saw what I went through on the East Coast, and then they both visited me out here. And okay, first they wanted to know why I wanted to live way out here in the middle of nowhere. And then I think they realized, oh, you're safe here, you're doing well, you're actually thriving, you're not 100 pounds anymore, you're healthy. And so I've been able to build up this life where I have a small farm. It's almost 5 acres, and I'm in the early stages of trying to figure out how to build some underground houses. I'd like to do a campground or rentals for electrosensitive people. Right now, it's just me and 3 goats and 2 cats. And yeah, have one milk goat who I milk every day and make cheese and yogurt. And Tito, he's going to be a fat goat. And if I ever decide to go back to cave life, I'll go in style. And so yeah, mostly life is good now. It was a lot of work to get here, but it was well worth it. And and I just want to show that people like us can thrive. We don't have to be victims living in a basement with a tinfoil hat, hiding from the world. We can go back to a natural lifestyle, how humans are supposed to live. I don't have insomnia whatsoever. I just go to bed when it's dark and wake up when the sun comes out, hopefully before the goats start screaming. And and I can work all day if I want to, or take the day off and relax most of the day if I want to. And I live near a beautiful river canyon. It's good for backpacking. And yeah, basically we can all get to this point if we want. It's a struggle, of course. There's heat and cold, and the areas without cell phone towers tend to be the most remote and uninhabitable regions of the world. So I definitely deal with some weather conditions here, which is good because it keeps the other humans out.
Right. Right. And it's not like you don't like people. That's clear in your book. But, why don't you say why you don't want to be near other humans?
Well, they're basically turning into cyborgs. They all have a device on them all the time, at least one device, a smartphone that's always radiating. Even if it's on airplane mode, it'll sometimes they still put out radiation. And they usually smell really bad, like disgusting fragrances and laundry detergents that they don't smell because their olfactory glands have been burnt out by constant use of these chemicals. But if I get even across the room from a normie, I can smell them and it's disgusting. And so it's not the people themselves that are the problem, but just their habits, these things that we've come to think of as normal. So yeah, I mostly have avoided people because of that, but I don't hate them. I want to share my message to the world and just try to help everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And we haven't talked so far about it, but you kind of touched on chemical sensitivity. So we are adding chemicals that have never existed before to our food supply, to the air that we breathe, to the soil and water, in remarkable numbers, tens of thousands of different kinds of compounds. And there are studies out there that have been done where they look at the blood in the umbilical cord for a newborn baby and what chemicals are there that are not of nature, and the number and type of the chemicals that you'll find in a newborn when they haven't even been in the world yet is staggering. So since these things are all unnatural, I've noticed that in people who have an electromagnetic sensitivity sometimes become sensitive to all of this proliferation of chemicals. What most people go to a grocery store or wherever and they get, pine scented air freshener or whatever. There's no pine in that.
Right.
People should know these are
That aisle of the grocery store. Just hold your nose and get through it.
yeah. So then and I don't know, some people would say maybe our purpose, our place in life as electrically sensitive beings is as a warning. The so-called canary in the coal mine, which goes back to the days of mining when miners would regularly die of poison gas, and the discovery that canaries could, would respond to the poisoning of the gas before humans. So they would actually bring canaries down in the mine in a cage, and if the canary ever stopped singing or was off its perch, then the evacuation was ordered, and by that manner, other people might be saved at the sacrifice of the canary, of course. I don't know really what our purpose is in that. I'll get your comments about that, but I love the fact that you're trying to help other people. So, what do you think about this sort of messenger or canary in the coal mine or whatnot?
Well, I believe it 100%, except that I don't think that we have to die for it to work. We just have to get out and then start making noise and to start spreading the word and show people before and after, and bring as many people as we can out into these environments with us and have them make their own electrosafe environment, turn off the Wi-Fi, stop paying for these things. If you stop paying, it's like you don't fight a war and put money into the enemy's bank account every month by paying your Verizon bill. Just stop supporting these companies. And as we talk on Zoom on the internet, but it's a landline wired internet, and the more people start demanding that, the easier it'll get. And but as far as being canaries, for some reason we're the lucky people who get to feel it first, but I think it can happen to anyone, with enough exposure and with thresholding event. And
Dr. Martin Paul has a paper that he's published on digital dementia and making the case for the emergence of dementia through this voltage-gated calcium channel mechanism. So maybe at least we'll be spared from that.
heard
And
that.
Yeah, there is that. So it there are days when it doesn't feel like we're so lucky.
Yeah.
Um, I still, even after recovering for these several years, and the majority of my symptoms are gone. But if I go out in what some people call the burn,
Mhm.
I get this cardiac dysrhythmia comes back and whatnot. So anyway, it's an ongoing struggle. But I'm with you that getting out of the burn is the first step. And before we end for today, do you want to talk just a little bit about? I'm going to show you something. I was inspired by your book, so my wife and I went for a walk in our forest, and I found this the other day. And maybe you can talk about what you found to be some helpful um, natural ways to not as a cure for this type of poisoning, but just as a sort of a get by. And so I'll try to show you here what I found. There we go. So that's
Hmm.
what it looks like on one side,
Oh,
and
cool.
let me show you
Yeah.
the other. Okay,
I
this is
show
the
me
other
the
side.
other side. I think it's not chaga. I think it's red belted polypore. Is there like a red it looks like there's a red stripe across the bottom of it.
Let's take a look.
It's out of focus.
All right, let me try. There we go.
Okay, maybe I guess it's tinder polypore then, which you can make a tea out of it. It enhances the immune system, similar to chaga or reishi.
So now let's tell people about why you know about mushrooms, and maybe talk a little about your thoughts about herbalism, and just before we finish up here.
Yeah, definitely. I've been into herbalism for years, and it's great. It's what's one of the things that's empowered me to actually make this enjoyable because I've been treating my symptoms for so many years that it's a challenge in it, and it's I mean a fun kind of challenge, and has allowed me to hone my herbalism skills. So I've learned a lot about the plants this way. And some of the things that have helped me the most have been the medicinal mushrooms. I have this. Let me show you right here. I've got this jar of the different mushroom powders, and you can buy these and mix them together. And I'll put a scoop of this is yerba mate with a scoop of mushroom powder in it, and I'll just have about a teaspoon of this once or twice a day.
Okay, so a bit of an unusual end to that interview, and the reason is just as we were getting ready to sign off for from the interview, Julia had an urgent situation. There was somebody at the front door who needed some help right away. So obviously that took precedence over the interview, and I can't really tell you how much effort it is to try to have two electrically sensitive people organize an interview over technology. So rather than waiting to some indeterminate future date when we could just film the end and the thank yous at the interview, this will have to suffice for now. So thanks, Julia, for the great interview, and thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time.